So I'll just start by saying, Mark, Chris, Ferris, I appreciate you guys being on this webinar today. You guys run some amazing companies, and I think a lot of the industry is really interested in this particular webinar to hear what you guys have to say. Ferris, what you said is, you have a little bit of PTSD from the memories that you have of being in their shoes, going through a lot of the growth hurdles that they're going through, whether they're a $600,000 company looking for their first hire, their $2 million company looking to actually grow their office and their overhead to 6 and then 12 million plus in revenue. I think a lot of the people on this call are interested in hearing how you guys did all those things, because I will tell you what, one of the best things before we get into the intros, I'll just say for everyone who's joining, Mark, you and I recently met, and I think the first time that we got together, I was sharing with you some growth hurdles that I was going through at a $7-8 million company, and you said something that was really encouraging to me is, "Ugh, I remember going through that exact same thing," and just hearing that from someone who's in your position with a company that I admire. And it's very inspiring to hear that, okay, you dealt with the same thing I did and made it past, and you guys, all three of you, have done this over and over again. So I'm really excited about this particular webinar. So I'll officially kick us off. I'll introduce myself. My name is AJ. I am the CEO and founder of Cornerstone Remodeling. It's a design build company just north of DC. And I'm also the CEO and founder of RENDR, who is sponsoring this webinar today. We're not going to get into any salesy stuff with RENDR, but I will drop a little nugget for you here. We've got some RENDR users on this call here. I'm really excited about this. Cornerstone Remodeling has grown to about that $8 to $10 million mark. And it's really changed my perspective on the type of leader I needed to be. So I reach out to these guys for advice. And now here we are. I'll kick us off. So, Chris, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Just tell us who you are, where you're located, what kind of work do you guys do, how long you've been in business, all that kind of fun.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, thanks, AJ. Nice to see you all. Thanks for joining this webinar. My name is Chris Payson. I founded a company coming up on 18 years ago in the suburbs of Philadelphia, about 45 minutes from downtown Center City. The company we actually rebranded to Cocoon. So it's called Cocoon, one word. And we did that about 5 years ago, coming up on 5 years. We're about 50 people total, design, build, residential remodeling. And we've probably seen most of our growth post-COVID. So obviously utilizing technology and things like that with the challenging and changing landscape. And this year we're on track for about 20 million in revenue.
That's awesome. That is awesome. You guys do primarily just design, build, kitchen, bath, basements, additions for, that upper middle market, I guess we would call it, right?
You got it. Yeah, upper middle market. That's really it. Like we really try to stick to our guns as far as doubling down on what we feel like we're best at, which is working with homeowners in their private spaces. So when people call reaching out about doing a restaurant fit out or helping them with their chiropractor's office waiting area, we just really do our best to stay disciplined and focused on residential home remodeling.
Awesome. Yeah, Mark, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, AJ. I appreciate you inviting me to this. So Mosby Building Arts is the company that I work for. I'm the president of the company. We are in the St. Louis metropolitan area. We have 140 employees. We've been in business for 77 years. We just finished last year 20. What's that?
Did I hear that correctly? You have 140 employees.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, we're pretty vertically integrated. So I'll talk about that in just a moment. We just ended last year at 27 million. Our plan for 2025 is 30 million. We are divided up really into three main products. Design build is 55% of our business, which is the classic design build. Average job size around 250,000. We also do a semi-custom kitchen and bath business as well, and that's a full pull and replace product. Um, Quality materials, but it's not a complex job. We're not gonna change the footprint at all. It's just an easier buying process and certainly a delivering process, and that's 20% of our business. And then the rest of our business is exteriors, replacement products, so windows, doors, siding, those are the main things that we do. We're vertically integrated. What that means is, of course, on staff, we've got architects, designers, estimators in the office, plus all the support staff and salespeople. But in the field, we have carpenters, lead carpenters, laborers, painters, plumbers, electricians, and tile setters. So the
Wow.
main thing we don't have is hardwood floor and HVAC. We sub those out, but everything else we do in-house for the most part. We do about 450 projects a year, so a lot of moving parts at the organization. And yeah, that's the story of Mosby Building Arts.
So we can talk about process and just like having a well-oiled machine, like you guys at Mosby like are really chugging along there. I love that.
Yeah.
So Ferris, welcome to this webinar. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and your companies?
Absolutely, yeah. So my name is Ferris Salsaba. I've been in business for about 15 years. I got into the business from probably, a unique angle compared to most. I was a sales and marketer that never lifted a hammer and had to figure a lot the hard way. I'm CEO and president of Canadian General Contractors Group. We've got various companies, but I'll speak mostly about my crown jewel, which is Ottawa General Contractors. We're a design build company, and we typically do about 20 million a year. In the last 5 years, we've done 95 million in home remodeling. And we're your typical design build. We do architectural design in-house and essentially construction management. So I've got like 8 project managers, 6 coordinators, admin staff, cost estimators, and what we call project consultants, which are essentially our salespeople. And we do what you can imagine: kitchens, bathrooms, basements, additions, infill construction, or at least what we call infill construction here in Canada. And by the way, we're in Ottawa, Canada, which is the Washington, D.C. of Canada, if you will. And yeah, we're starting to get into low-rise apartment buildings because apparently we need more homes here in Canada, and essentially zoning's opening up to allow for a lot of that. So interesting times.
Fantastic. Yeah. I love the difference in company profiles we have here, vertical, horizontal, and Chris, I guess you and I are pretty similar with the upper middle market, like design build, like that is like the core driver of our businesses. So it's great to have like a smorgasbord here of businesses that, just to see how you guys did it. And Ferris and Chris, I've got to pick your brains about the project consultants as the salespeople, because I feel like as a design build kind of scaling seems to be a common denominator there. So, well, hey, let's go ahead and get into some of our topics that we have today. I really wanted to start by addressing growth challenges. One of the questions I get often are, what growth challenges have you seen? Kind of where were those bottlenecks those glass ceilings, right? So Chris, you and I have had a very similar storyline, although you're a little ahead of me, right? We've been in business for 13, you said 18 years. So you and I have had a pretty similar pathway. Are there specific uh, growth hurdles, speed bumps, glass ceilings that you encountered growing your business from that $1 to $2 million mark up to where you are now? Like, where were those, and kind of what did you see there?
Yeah. What did I see there? What I'd say is, for us, the biggest challenge I think that we faced was just the normal chaos in the industry, um, and looking to be as discerning as possible to identify what those current issues are in the design, build, remodeling industry, and look to identify them and look to design solutions around them. That would probably be the single biggest thing, is um, looking back on that is, why do we keep, I say like beating our heads up against the wall with the same continuous issues, right? We have to put structure in place to make sure we don't do this again. We're allowed to make mistakes. We're not allowed to make them twice. Um, but also like jumping through customers' hoops, right? That's a big one. Is you get these random requests for things, and you're taught to like to serve the customer. You need to almost just do whatever they ask. And I think as you mature, you start to realize the more structure I have and almost the more rigidity I have, as long as my process is designed to delight a customer, then the rigidity actually serves them well. Um, Instead of flexing and asking for some random thing that we're not experienced in, but we're going to try, and then it ends up going poorly, and then they lose all their, call it, confidence in us. It's, man, like we've got to like really stick to our guns at like what we're best at, build a structure. The homeowners aren't the experts, we are.
Yeah.
And let's grow with that in mind, because it's really difficult to scale chaos.
So to cut through a lot of the chaos, especially as you're growing, right? There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things can feel like they're flying off the wheel. Like to cut through that and really focus on, okay, framework, system, process. That's the key to kind of get through some of those challenging periods, if I heard you correctly.
Yeah, you got it. You got it. And I feel like historically our industry, and I've been at fault as well, like, we just kind of keep running into the same historical challenges and then just chalk it up to, well, that's part of the job. It's part of the challenges of the industry. As opposed to, no, there's a better way forward. Let's find it.
I've always said solve for like the issues that we're having today. We need to provide solutions that answer these tomorrow. So like we need to not just solve these for today. Like we need to think about what this problem looks like when we are, doing twice the volume, because that's the solution we really need to be putting in place. Mark, Ferris, do you guys have any thoughts on like specific areas of your business through if you think of your business in a timeline of where those hurdles, as biggest challenges were, or specific cases?
I
Well,
mean,
I can.
where do you start? Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Well, I would say that I can give a specific example and then also talk a little bit about globally what happened. So I joined the company 15 years ago. We were doing at right around $8 million, and we had 15 employees at the time. And what I realized, didn't know it at the time, but certainly going through it, what I realized is that we were growing as a company that was personality driven versus process driven. And what does that mean? It was a smaller company. Employees wear a bunch of different hats, so they may fulfill a lot of different roles in the company. And at a certain point, you have to start really being clear about which hat those employees need to wear,
Hmm.
and really start thinking about driving your company from a process standpoint. So moving from a personality driven company to a process driven company.
I like that.
Um, so we had a client services employee who, she supported a lot of the salespeople at the time, and she was great at her job. But what we realized is that we wanted her to focus a little bit more on some things that were a part of her job and take away things that weren't really a part of her job. And that was actually hard for her because she was really used to wearing all these different hats. So you'll find that as you're a smaller company growing into a larger company, and the different phases you go in, your employees are going to struggle too. So you have to pay attention to them. Um, but it's a natural part of the progression. You're talking about scalability. You need to have the processes in place, and sometimes that comes down to eliminating certain things people do, and make sure they're focusing on what's most important in their particular role. Um, so anyway, that's a specific example of what we experienced when we turned into a process-driven company.
Yeah, Ferris, you want to hop in too?
Yeah, apart from, what's kind of already been said, systems, processes, and so forth, when I really reflect back and reflect on kind of what's helped us get to where we are here today, a lot of it has to do with getting the right people on board. I've been doing this for 15 years. My CFO has been with me for 15 years. My general manager has been with me for 15 years, et cetera. And a lot of these people are problem solvers because as your company grows, you go through a few different evolutions. It could be one way at 2 to 3 million, and then 5 and 10 and 15 and 20, and it's going to continuously change. And the key is having leaders who are ready to solve problems. And I don't mean specific, site related problems. I mean, built within that machine that you're building, whether it's a systems problem or whether it's a process problem, and filling in those gaps along the way, and people who are ready to kind of bring solutions. And then eventually it does keep going back to getting those right people on board and building out middle management when you get to a certain revenue size that allows for you to spend a certain amount of overhead that where you can pay certain people to kind of get in certain positions. And that was kind of like my key to success is having these problem solvers within our company, and then kind of having that built into our culture. I think it was Jeff Bezos who had a white paper that called it day one. And no matter how big Amazon was, they're always a day one company. And that's something that we kind of adapted here. It's like no matter what the revenue size is like we're always treating it like a day one company. And if I were to give growth advice to others that are watching this webinar, and often I talk to remodelers, like, so Canadian General Contractors Group, part of our growth is growth through acquisitions. And often I'll talk to guys in the $2 million mark and $3 million mark, and I'll ask them, well, why haven't you been able to do more? And they'll tell me, well, we're booked out for the next year, and we're booking for next year, and a lot of it has to do with fear of growing. We never necessarily had that. Being a sales and marketer first, growth was always in the back of our mindset or on top of our mindset, and. And when I often mention that to some of these founders of these companies that we're prospecting, uh, it really does turn out that they are scared to grow, because with that growth is going to come the unsettling feeling and the ultimate reality
Pain.
that things are not going to go perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some jobs are going to go sideways. Some homeowners are going to be upset. Some staff members are not going to want additional responsibility, and it is uncomfortable. But in order to get there, it's necessary.
Yeah, it does take a lot of guts to grow because, yeah, you do experience a lot of changes. I think we're getting some really good questions. We're actually going to get here in a moment. Um, I'll go ahead and answer, or sorry, ask these live here. We kind of experienced a glass ceiling kind of in between 2 and 3 million, and I realized that it, like Chris, you talked about like chaos. That's when we felt like we had so much going on. And Mark, yeah, we were all wearing different hats. Especially the owner of the company has to learn how to delegate, right? And so when you get up to kind of where I am now, where we're facing kind of another little bit of a glass ceiling, the change that my organization had to go through to go from a bunch of friends just doing work together, it's kind of what we felt like at 2
Right.
million, to going to a company that is structured. We hear it all the time. Oh, it feels this is very corporate. We have HR for the first time. Mark, I admire your HR department. You've got two HR managers in your business. We have HR. We have compliance stuff that we now have to do, and we have like reviews that have to be documented, and we're basically we have to hold our employees like more accountable to things that we never had to do before. And it requires the uncomfortable change. And I think Ferris, you nailed it. Like some employees aren't even comfortable with that. I've heard it. Some of my employees were like, "Oh, I liked this better when we were smaller." It's like, Mark, was it you who told me that sometimes a business will outgrow an employee? I think you said that once. And that's kind of what we're experiencing now is our organization's growing and it's continued to move in that direction, but it means that, okay, we can't do the things the way that we used to anymore. You can't just not use Expensify to track your receipts and make job logs digitally because you don't want to use technology. It's like, no, it doesn't work with our company now. So having those uncomfortable conversations is something that I feel like a lot of business owners will fear as well. I've got a couple of good questions here that I think are pertinent to this conversation. So as we grew our companies, Roland says, did you take any loans to scale up, or was it slow as you go with cash on hand? So I think there are two schools of thought here. You can grow on borrowed money or you can grow on earned money. So do you guys have any thoughts on, I have certainly some thoughts myself on this, but any anyone want to take a stab at an answer on that one?
It,
Chris.
yeah, I would say our growth, our personal kind of convictions are to seek to grow as much as possible on earned revenue, right? So you're kind of working all year to earn a profit, and then that at least provides you confidence and a buffer for next year's investments, whether those investments come out of capital or whether those investments come in the form of overhead. You're not really, the last resort is to go to the bank, or honestly, I'd even say an outside investor, just because it can complicate things. Um, and just is so to answer the question, no, we haven't. We've grown with without the bank and finances involvement.
That's great. Mark.
Yeah, I would say there was a certain point where we were only going to do things with our own cash, but then we got stuck, and so we really learned that using other people's money is a wise way to run your business. Keeping in mind you have to have a healthy balance sheet, and I think small business owners really should understand balance sheet metrics and what's really important regarding those metrics. But we absolutely utilize other people's money. We have a line of credit. We hardly ever touch that line of credit. So everybody should have a line of credit for sure. But what do we leverage things? Well, we have 80 vehicles in our fleet. When we purchase those, many times we're going to use other people's money to buy that because the cash that we keep in hand is more valuable to us than giving it away. When we do big investments like remodel our office, we're using other people's money when we spend $500,000 to remodel our space. So I think there's a balance there. You shouldn't get over leveraged, but certainly when you start to grow, using other people's money is a wise way to do it. And I'm sure Ferris is probably, my guess is based on his scale, he's probably used other people's money, but I'll let him speak.
Well, it's funny and it's really interesting, right? Because from my PTSD days and having cash flow issues, taking money was always a big fear of mine. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, we leverage money whenever we're doing real estate development. It's like the only real way to obviously build $1 million, low-rise apartment buildings. But as far as like OGC, Ottawa General Contractors goes, we've been fortunate that we haven't had to take any loans. And like, the caveat is like we're in a really good market, so it might not be this advice might not pertain to everybody. But something that helped us out a lot in the early days was changing how we collect our money. And instead of financing these projects for homeowners, we moved our milestone payments to the beginning of certain milestones and front loading them. So it's allowed us to really do really well with cash flow.
Right.
So we never really had as a matter of fact, whenever I try to go get lines of credit, because typically these are against your receivables. The bank tells me I collect way too much money too fast, and I'm not a good qualifier for a line of credit.
Hmm.
Yeah. I have I have a I've had an experience, we grew very quickly, almost accidentally. Therefore, we ended up growing on borrowed money, and we wanted to make sure we weren't over leveraging it. At the time, we were not. But then we went through a very slow period as we re-engineered our sales process because we outgrew it. And that slowdown in sales really put a pinch on our cash flow. And it puts you in a very precarious position if you are over leveraged. And at the time, through probably a good 6 or 8 months, it was a huge struggle. So making sure that again you understand your balance sheet metrics, you are not over leveraging your company. Borrowing for vehicles, I think, is a smart move. I'm glad you brought that up, Mark. But of course, the line of credit really should only ever be tapped when you absolutely need it in like almost like an emergency fund type of thing. But when you can grow to a point where, okay, you're making consistent, uh, like good profit numbers on your P&L, like when you can consistently do that year over year, I think as you get past that $6 and $8 million mark, it does give you the ability to make your next steps. Like Chris, like you are moving forward with your company on earned revenue, earned cash that your company earned last year to say, now what kind of fun things can we do? And that's ultimately what we aspire to do to get there. So I think growing your company, I think as long as you're, you can do it on cash and do it slowly. You can do it on borrowed money as long as you're not over leveraging, a combination of the two to get you moving forward. But ultimately,
Yeah.
just do it in the right way.
Yeah, AJ, I like Ferris, what he said. The PTSD, I started the business in 2007. In 2008 was like the downturn of the real estate market, at least in the United States, right? And 2009, it just all crashed. And at that time, that's when the PTSD in me started in banks were calling loans,
Oh
right?
goodness, yeah.
And you're like, okay, no big deal. I have a line of credit. I can pay this $425 a month for the next, 10 years. And then they're like, no, we want it all back now. And it just kind of puts you in that spot where you're like, you know what? Banks are great, right? Like, and they say that like the best time to go get a loan is when you don't need it. But banks are no dummies too. When they start seeing if that were to happen again, and that chance always exists in some way, right? They quickly can become not so nice people, and obviously just want to get their money back whatever way possible. So that's a little bit on my background. As far as operations, I agree with Mark on, if there's big things like our facility here, which are technically owned by different entities, not really Cocoon. But when you're doing those types of investments and you need $1 million, million and a half, $2 million, for us, I think it makes so much sense to use the bank's money at low interest rates. Um, so not to confuse anybody out there. I'll finish with this, AJ. It was a really good question. Um, but guys, to me, there's no shortcut. If you're thinking, well, business is tough, it's hard. If I go get $100,000 loan, maybe it becomes easier. I would just say that's not probably, if that's your default kind of reasoning, I'd say that's probably not the answer.
Right.
I think as you grow and you start hitting 5, 10, 15, 20 million in revenues, it becomes a different game. Like your financial structure changes, and utilizing banks makes a lot more sense. There's just almost a lot more safety net and protections in place, and you've been able to prove consistency. But I remember being, at the 1 million, 2 million mark. And I think, in my opinion, if I were to have gone out and just tried to borrow towards kind of operations and success, I probably would have, I don't know if I would have, achieved the same level. I think I almost kind of like outsourcing some of that.
Yeah, it can certainly expedite kind of where you want to go, but then you end up slowing down. And that slowdown period, when you borrow that money and you grow like I did, and then there's that little bit of a slowdown, that's a precarious position that you really want to try and avoid. I would say if you want to borrow money, make sure that business plan is in your hand. I think Chris kind of nailed it there. Like don't think about borrowing money just to get you out of a pinch, or like without a really truly thoughtful way of like, what is your ROI on borrowing this money? How are you going to pay it back, and how is it going to benefit your business before you go in and do it? Um, we have a good question. I think that'll kind of kick off, one of the other conversation topics I really wanted to get into today is, Jeff asked, I love moving from personality to a process-driven company. And he said it makes so much on paper, but how do you maintain a positive workspace in the face of pretty major mindset change? Uh, you know, this is probably like an afternoon conversation, like a 3 hour, right? Because I think we've all gone through this. But Mark, what would you say? What would you say to this? How did you maintain a healthy culture? We can talk about hiring practices. We can talk about accountability within the organization. I'd love you to touch on 40X a little bit. But how do you go from a personality driven to a process driven company and maintain that really good culture in the business?
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly, you have to start with making sure that you're open and transparent about what's going on and why things are happening. You're going to have, it's kind of like politics, and we're not going to talk politics, but you're going to have, if you have 50 people who work for your company or 20 people who work for your company or 100, doesn't matter, 50% of them are going to be afraid of change and 50% are going to love change, right? And the percentages could be moved one way or the other, but generally speaking, you're going to have your people who are afraid of it and then people who are embracing it. Um, and so I think if you openly acknowledge to your team that, hey, change is hard for a lot of people, and but one constant in any business is change. In order to remain relevant, you have to change. You can point to, and we do, by the way, because this is a conversation I think you have to continually talk about, is we point to businesses who seemingly would never go out of business. Blockbuster, right? There's an example of a business that, how could Blockbuster go out of business? Well, they didn't remain relevant. So you can't, by remaining relevant, you're going to have change. And so you first start with always discussing why change is important. And most often it's because you're trying to remain relevant. And if you want to make it more personal, what does relevance mean to the employee? It means you get to keep your job and you get to have a future that's bright. So I always try to put it in the words that matter the most to them, what's in it for them? What does change bring for them? Besides being scary, which you absolutely should talk about, you also need to say, well, this is why growth is important. And the last thing I'll say is growth comes through being uncomfortable, right? Um, Anything that you grow in, usually you're going to go through some sort of struggle. And if you can kind of train yourself to handle that change, just like you do train yourself in a gym. If you train your organization to accept change and go through change and have the processes in place to have change happen, that improves your chance for success.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing to that, because this is a very real thing for me. I think the biggest inflection point that your business will go through, if you're that $1, $2, $3 million company listening, and you're going to grow and say 8, 10, I would say that when your business starts to change in this manner, right, going to more of a process-driven company, which happened for us past 4 million, like 6, 7, $8 million is where our business really started to change and lean on this. All your, maybe not all, I think, Mark, you said 50%. I would say 85, 90% of my employees were very resistant to changing the way that we did things at Cornerstone. You know, going to a process-driven company, it was very uncomfortable. However, strict accountability from me, I needed to be a better CEO. I needed to be a better leader. And through accountability, we have an accountability-driven culture. We have now gone through this where now we've moved from a company that kind of did things, everybody kind of did things their own way or was in their own head, to now this is all of my employees now are loving the framework. They love the process. They say this is how we do things. So when you can push through all that uncomfortable mess of all your employees looking at you like, oh, I don't like this new way, or this feels too corporate. By the time you make it to the other side of that, everybody settles back in. And because, Mark, when you can make sure the employee knows how much this is going to benefit them, their position, their growth trajectory, paint a future for them, that's when they start to see the other side of the change, right? And then they can start to see, oh, okay, so yeah, now I can go there. It really does help. So we have maintained a pretty healthy culture at Cornerstone, and we still feel like we're all friends doing business, but now we have this framework in place, and it feels good to have these boundaries and these
Yeah.
guardrails for the organization.
Hey, AJ, on that note, we talk about like the topic of the webinar is scale. And so scale sounds great because it can almost just sound larger. It can sound like higher revenues. It can sound like higher profit dollars, more opportunities. And just obviously for us, and many, the attractiveness to it as leaders is mostly like the challenge of it and the opportunities that come with it. But almost like also don't be fooled. It is very challenging to
Yeah.
scale, right? And so these topics that we're sharing are just things that we've gone through. um, your point that you just brought up, like help paint a picture. This is what's in it for you as a team member, right? With a scaled company and more opportunity. We've come across team members that weren't interested in that though. And what I'd say is that's what I mean about it's that emotional toll that it takes on you as a leader of wow, like I've got good people that work with me, but they're not as interested in scaling as I am. Do I value the relationship as a team member more than scaling, right? And you have to go through that like wrestling emotionally of maybe you have a good team member or two that's just not bought in and you've tried and tried and tried to like, hey, but this, let me paint this picture. And they go, no, I just want to do 8 projects a year and just kind of, work 6 hours a day. And I wouldn't even say there's anything wrong with that. That's kind of the picture that they want to paint. It just doesn't always align with the company's goals. And you have to make those decisions. Sometimes it's parting ways with certain team members who just aren't rowing in the same direction and not as passionate about it.
I want to touch on one thing, one quote, before we jump into a couple more questions. There's a quote from Tom Watson from a book called Business and Its Beliefs. This quote, it like drives me, and I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. Any organization, in order to survive and achieving success, must have a sound set of beliefs on which it premises all its policies and actions. I believe the most important single factor in corporate success is faithful adherence to those beliefs. Finally, the organization must be prepared to change everything about itself except those beliefs. How important is it for you guys to have a set of core beliefs, core values, a mission statement, a vision statement? How important are those things for you guys?
Yeah, it's tremendously important, and I'll drill a little bit deeper. 2018, 2019, we are doing about $10 million a year. Everything looked great on paper, but my staff retention wasn't great. My suppliers were upset with us for various reasons. My client satisfaction rate wasn't great at all. And I really had a lot of deep thinking to do of if I even wanted to do this anymore. Because I always had a dream of being an entrepreneur and making some money, but I wanted to be proud of what I was doing. And like I even went down on as far as selling the business and business valuation and selling the business and all that kind of stuff. But it just never really sat right with me. I had this weird feeling in my stomach that I was making the wrong decision. Like I was one day away from finalizing everything. And then when I finally decided I wasn't going to do that and sell the company, I asked myself, like, what am I really upset about? Like, what's bothering me? Like, I'm running a $10 million company. At that time, I was, 34 years old, 35 years old, and I pretty successful. And when I realized that I don't sell construction services. I sell experiences. And what was bothering me was the employee experience, the vendor experience, and then the client experience. And then when we went to work and I sat down with my leadership team, I was just like, how are we going to fix all this? And they're all intertwined. When we figured out how we were going to solve all these things, my business transformed. It literally doubled overnight. Our client satisfaction rate jumped to 95% plus at 20 million versus 10 million. And then that also ties into your employee experience because you can have great staff, great people, great systems, great processes. If your projects aren't going well, they're not going to be happy, right?
Mm.
Because they're selling promises to everybody, to the client, to the vendors. And if we're not honoring those promises, then they're not going to feel proud working there. And that always ties into the vendor. So everything we do when it comes to like a systems, processes perspective, anything to do with whatever change we're making, we are always asking ourselves, how does that better influence the client, employee, and vendor experience?
Yeah. Mark, you guys recently revamped your I don't know if it was your mission statement or your core values, but I remember you showing us like your newly revamped. Do you mind sharing that?
Sure. We recently revised our vision and mission. And did a little bit of revisions on our core values, but all three of them are what I consider core foundational elements of the organization. So I'll just talk about the process for the vision, because I felt like that was, to me, one of the most tangible things from vision making that we had not used before. But there's a company called oh boy, I can't believe I'm drawing. Oh, Zingerman. So if anybody's heard of Zingerman, they have a whole process. It's actually Zingerman's a deli. They've been around for years, but they're known for helping companies developing new vision statements. And so their process is all about creating an artifact in the future that you work towards. So our company worked with the management team, and this was last April that we did this. I drafted a letter to our board, so we have an advisory board. I drafted a letter, but the letter was written in 2030. And the letter was just a report to our board about what was happening. And so in that letter, we said things like, we just opened our fourth location in Lake St. Louis, and we currently hit the $50 million mark. Our training facility now puts out 12 new apprentices a year. We're at 285 employees. And the great thing this year is we finally have implemented health insurance for families. So we pay for all the health insurance for families. And so this letter is written, and this artifact now is accessible to all employees. It's been given to all employees. You go around the office, there's a QR code. It says Mosby 2030 with a QR code. You look at it, pulls up the letter. And so our vision is about Vision Mosby 2030. Anyway, so that's the process that we went through. It's very powerful. Our decisions are made based on our values and our beliefs, and also our mission and our vision.
Yeah, and you guys wrapped a bunch of your um, documents that you hand to customers in various stages of their process that are wrapped around. Forgive me, I'm blanking on the word or the phrase that you guys have all these things kind of wrapped around. What was that
Yeah,
again?
so our mission statement is to set and crush expectations.
That's what it is.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that's our mission statement. Our vision is different than the mission, but yes, so that's a new mission statement that we put in place, because what we realized is that whenever we failed, it's because we didn't set the right expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we ran into any kind of conflict with the client, and frankly, any kind of conflict with employees, so we are going through a process of, at every milestone, there's an expectations document that says, here's what you should expect at this milestone, from your first appointment to your measure and photo to your project walkthrough to when the job starts to what happens in construction, what happens near the end of construction, what happens after construction. That's for the client side. We have one for employees. What do we expect from you as an employee in your role? There's a generic one, there's a specific one for the role, and there's what to expect from the employer. So here's what you should expect from us as an employer. So we're trying to find any place that we need to set expectations and be explicit about that.
I love that. So basically, that mission statement is driving, like infusing like roots deep down into the organization from every level, from the client experience all the way to the employee experience, all around this idea of setting, meeting, knowing, and excelling at these expectations, or at meeting, what do you say? It's
To set and crush expectations.
crushing those expectations. I love that a mission statement can drive a lot of that through an organization, wrapping it around a specific idea. Um, One of the things that, not to move so quickly past this, but one of the things I really did want to touch on today is I noticed we have about 15 minutes left in this webinar. Again, this will probably go for 2 or 3 hours, but we want to honor everybody's times. I want to talk about a little bit more about, professional, like personal development. I think a lot of us get into this business. Perhaps a lot of you guys watching, you guys were carpenters. At least I was. I was a carpenter. I kind of grew up in the trades, watched my grandfather and his three brothers all have four different construction companies, all side by side. So I aspired to do that, right? But I came up, I learned the trades. I went to school for architecture and I opened my design build company. So there's a great guy in the space, Doug Howard, if you know him. What he says is he runs a consulting firm that helps guys like me, guys like you who are listening to find the business behind the passion, right? I had to change who I was because I was certainly no businessman. I was a carpenter. I wanted to, grow a business. And all of a sudden now, as I scaled again, it was past that $2, $3 million mark. I realized I needed to be a different type of leader for this organization because now I'm no longer the carpenter or the project manager or the estimator for my company. I am managing those guys while I'm trying to figure out, okay, what is this thing called a balance sheet, So I had to go through a lot of professional development. I looked up to you guys. We've had some great conversations. What did you guys look to do as your businesses kind of grew to new heights and maybe uncomfortable or past where you felt like you were, maybe capable? Did you guys ever deal with like imposter syndrome and how did you overcome that? Anybody want to speak to that or am I alone on that one?
I'm happy to go first, guys. Yeah, well, I guess my encouragement and what worked for me was to not do it alone, right? And I do think that where we saw just the start of the engine was when you rub shoulder to shoulder with like-minded individuals, right? And so, where does that start, and what does it look like for you? It could be attending trade shows, right? Meaning like industry-specific shows, developing relationships and even friendships that way. Joining Facebook groups of people who are seeking to chip away at the challenges of the home remodeling industry. For me specifically, and Cocoon as a whole, we were introduced to Remodeler's Advantage probably 10 years ago. And that was just a game changer for us to be able to meet twice a year with similar size companies um, who are going through similar challenges and maybe not all at the same time. So you're able to help somebody with a current challenge and they're going through something that you'll be going through in 6 months. Um, and just to kind of be there for each other and to kind of build that bonding and rapport together. To me, that was I would almost say a secret to our success. Not that it's a huge secret, but to encourage anybody out there, just don't go at it alone because running a business is a lonely place. Being an entrepreneur is very isolating. A lot of people depend on you. So, Remodeler's Advantage for us, and there's other types of groups like that. It's a place for you to, it's almost at times like therapy, right? And so, besides the business side of it, there's the humanistic side of it, which will help you calm you down. And because you're doing it not just alone, but you're kind of doing it shoulder to shoulder with some other great folks.
Yeah. Peer review groups are great. Looking up to you guys, having conversations with guys who've gone before you is great. Any other suggestions? I for one would suggest books. Philip is going to ask here for some book recommendations, which we'll get to in a minute here because that was something I wanted to bring up. So Philip, I will get some book recommendations from this group. I have a few. So aside from like books, peer review, guys, Mark or Ferris, any suggestions for guys who are growing their companies to learn how to become a better leader?
I, apart from what Chris said, and obviously joining these peer groups are great. They weren't around when I was going through hyper growth, or at least I didn't know about them. But for me, a big one is mindset, is being able to mold and grow and nurture and feed your mindset, removing limiting beliefs. And, a lot of times there is that self-doubt. We might have imposter syndrome, but being able to kind of just like form that mindset that, we can grow and we can learn. We live in the information age where all the answers that you're looking for are accessible to you if you go and look for them and find them. But often enough, I find that entrepreneurs are stuck with limiting beliefs and what their capabilities are or what they could look like. So molding your mindset is probably the biggest place to start for me, and that can look in different ways. I love reading books about real people doing real things, so autobiographies. I have the mindset of if somebody can do something, then I can do it as well too. And I'd like to kind of like live through their life and see what that looked like. And nurturing my leadership skills. Played football for 12 years, was captain of the football team, and trying to take some of those transferable skill sets over to the workplace, except you just can't yell at people. So you got to be careful about that one. But
Tackle either, I guess,
yeah, but some of the transferable skill sets, such as leading by example, being disciplined, first in, last out, that sort of thing.
I'd say that, one of the beautiful things is, running a construction company, now a software company, is that I didn't, I had severe imposter syndrome moving into the software space. But I will tell you what, running a software company is the same as running a construction company. It is a bunch of people doing life together, and I've always treated it that way. And I think when you can have respect for others and respect for yourself too, for us, I guess you're, a lot of that, you know, um, like when you have that self-doubt, have some self-compassion, right? Like I can be a good leader. I can do this. I can change. I can lead this organization. um, let's hop into a couple of book recommendations before I want to move into some like work-life balance conversation, because certainly growing an organization takes a toll on us. We kind of all have said this, very challenging. I want to go through some work-life balance type of conversations here, but really quickly to answer Philip's question, do you have any book recommendations? I probably have 2 dozen, but I can boil it down to two. But first, I'll let you guys go. Any specific books that speak out to you that you could recommend for anybody listening that have helped you grow and lead your companies?
One that really sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was just going to mention one. It's actually a recent book that just came out, and it's actually written by a home remodeler. And the book is called Beyond the Hammer by Brian Gottlieb.
Brian, yeah.
Yeah, came out last September, I think. It's outstanding, especially for somebody who's running a remodeling company. It's got some really great uh, actionable advice in it. It starts as a fable about a remodeler, and that's the first half of the book, and the second half of the book really talks about some pillars of leadership that he discussed. So that's outstanding. There's of course a lot of other books I could recommend, but that one's the freshest one, and I've given it out to all the managers here, just because it's got some really really great content.
That's great. Anyone
Sorry,
else?
Ferris, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, no worries. One that really resonated with me during the hyper growth stage was The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And he talks a lot about wartime CEO and peacetime CEO, and how as a CEO and leader, you kind of have to be dynamic and adapt as different scenarios arise. And there was a lot that I took away then from those days that kind of gave me a little bit more comfort when the difficult times did set in, and when I started just literally questioning everything I was doing, and I wanted to run away from it all. And it made me kind of buckle down and realize it's just kind of part of the journey, and gave me a little bit of tools there. But that's one that always stuck out for me.
Love it. Chris?
Hey guys, I always tend to go probably too deep here, but I can't get, when somebody asks me for a book recommendation, I always default to the Bible. It's just helped me, most of my life, just with the wisdom in that literature there, in life, and helping me understand myself and help me understand the big picture of it all. Because remodeling is just a small part of what I do and who I am, in again the big picture. So that's just my encouragement to anyone. If you're looking for a good book, even though it seems intimidating, is get as much into the Bible as possible. Now, if I bring it up a level or 10, right, it's I really enjoyed a book years ago called Delivering Happiness. And that's like the story of Zappos, which is a shoe delivery company. It's just a cool story. I love reading about entrepreneurs who did it. Yeah. Because I will say, right, we know the stats. Most try and most fail. But then some who fail try again and are successful. I just love the stories, like the stories of being in the trenches, and how it was weeks away from failure and something happened, right? And it caused it to explode.
Yeah.
Another practical one I read years ago is Dave Ramsey. It's called Entree Leadership. It was just very practical, kind of like it's the leadership and entrepreneurism just kind of blended together in some down to earth practical ways of how to run a business. Because most of us who are in the trades didn't really go to business school. You're kind of figuring it out as you go, often a little bit behind the eight ball and a little bit late. So I really love this question because, leaders are readers. And so getting into as many books as possible and just making yourself a student of the industry and learning from others is a game changer.
Yeah.
AJ, I got one more actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
You Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. When I was
Ooh.
going through a really tough time, reading about this guy's story made me realize that, my worries are not that big of a deal. The former Marine who's also like a ultra marathon runner, a guy who would like run a marathon for like 3 days in a row. Like this guy's gone through some adversity. And I don't know if it just makes me comfortable realizing other people have gone through something more difficult than me that gives me a little bit of peace. But reading his life story was actually really inspirational.
Yeah. I have a few that I would recommend. You know, I love the stories that, you can look at entrepreneurs before. The Founders is about the story of PayPal and how it started. You have some, game-changing companies that exist now that all started there with PayPal. So called The Founders. And then I followed that up by reading a book called Build by Tony Fadell. And just to see the storylines are parallel kind of at the same time, but you're starting to see Chris, you saw how PayPal like almost failed, and they went through these like very troublesome times with the dot-com bubble bursting, and to see that juxtaposed with Build by Tony Fadell, and how he had this idea for like the iPod, but he was just too early, right? And then all of a sudden the dot-com bubble came and they weren't able to raise money, but PayPal was able to raise money right before the bubble burst, and that's kind of what excelled them. So just to see these parallels and how these businesses, they never gave up. They just never gave up, even despite the differences in how they handled those crises. A couple of really pertinent ones, though, for personal development. Redeeming Your Time by Jordan Rayner was one of the best books. It is a Christian themed book. It focuses on the life of Jesus and how he was so he's one of the most productive individuals ever to exist in history, and it focuses on the things that he focused on. It's very practical in the business sense. Probably one of the best time management books I have ever read. It's a great one. And then, of course, for like personal business development, a book called Beyond Entrepreneurship. I think they just came out. Well, I know they just came out with the second one. It's on my shelf there. Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0. It's just recently, with a lot more material. That book has really helped me with just the knowledge of as I grow both of these companies. What has what have other companies that I that in the space like GE and Ford and uh, Yamaha, all these other big corporations, they were also a very tiny company at one point. And what did they do to be able to get to achieve this big greatness? I don't think Cornerstone's ever going to be a billion-dollar company, but some of the things are very practical and how I need to run my organization. Talks about setting a BHAG, if you guys are familiar with the acronym, a big, hairy, audacious goal, something that your organization can look to, something inspiring, right? And we might go a couple of minutes past here, but I really want to ask you guys two more questions. One is from one of our members here who asked a great question. But before I ask that, I just want to touch on this work-life balance. How, like, this is one thing that's very near and dear to me because I have a wife, I have three young kids, we're adopting two more, and I'm running two businesses. This is one of the things that I look to leaders like you guys to say, how in the world did you grow your company to that size and still manage life elsewhere? Any practical takeaways, quick tips that you can leave us on that topic from any of you guys? Mark.
So I have two tips. One is if nobody's read the book Atomic Habits,
Oh,
It's just
great one.
it's a great book, and the reason that's important is because if you are truly trying to change and develop that type of balance and you don't have it, Atomic Habits will really help you picture what you want to be and get there. And then it relates to my second topic, which is you need to build it into your schedule, into your routine. You absolutely have to do it. I have time set in my calendar every morning to work out. I have time in my calendar every morning to reflect. I have time scheduled with my family, I make sure I schedule time and build it into my routine. Those two things are related.
One of the things that I'll say is to turn everything off up here, because that's the one thing when you go home and all this stuff is still rattling around in your head. One of the biggest changes I've made is it's called the Zeigarnik effect. If you're not familiar with it, there's a several books that go over this psychological study. It goes over things that are incomplete, that you haven't been able to complete during the day, that to-do list, that task list. Even writing it down sometimes doesn't allow it to get out of it, escape your head. One of the things I began to do is schedule focus blocks throughout my week in random periods where I can schedule 2 or 3 hours of time that's just deep work, focus time. And what I'll do is I'll take my to-do list and I'll just scatter it into several different focus blocks through the week. Just that activity alone, knowing that all of my to-do lists are now scheduled into my calendar through the week, has been a game changer. I feel like I'm more present at the dinner table, listening to my kids about their day, more present with my wife at home. Like focus blocks, schedule your to-do list through the week, and you'll see, hopefully, you'll see a huge improvement there. One or two more from any of you before I ask this last question here.
Yeah, really quickly, I'm not an expert in this field, to be honest with you, but like I do a pretty good job. I'm always home for dinner and evenings or weekends are for my family. The two real things that kind of stick out for me are making sure you take care of yourself first, mentally, physically, spirituality, eat good food, do some kind of physical activity, very important, because you can't be the best version of yourself without putting some intention into it, and especially practicing a lot of gratitude because we're very fortunate to even be in a position where we could, do what we're doing. And number two is just having good people. When you could spread the responsibilities amongst, some good people and not have everything flow up to you, it can make a really big difference. Because that's a big difference between good and great. A great person on your team will take on much more responsibility than even just a good person.
And Alyssa, if you're still on, this is the question she posed, and I actually wanted to end the webinar with this particular one, so I'm glad she asked it. If you were starting your business today, what is the one piece of advice you wish you had? It's a
All right,
thought,
I'll go first.
right? Yeah.
What I would say is take yourself seriously from the get-go and understand your numbers and charge appropriately. When I say appropriately, it's probably more than you're comfortable with.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that.
I think it took us just too many years of almost like having sympathy for customers to where you're like, and also not knowing your numbers in and out to where you're just like, man, I'm working my butt off. I'm running the whole company. Let's say I have 8 or 10 employees, and I feel like my electrician makes the same as much as me. And it just kind of, you have to kind of get so frustrated to where you're like, that has to change immediately. So,
Mm.
It's a hard question, right? Because those the part of the journey, the growth comes from all these mistakes that you've made, right? But if I had one piece of advice, it'd probably just say be stick to what you know, as you know, and try not to venture off too much. At one point, I probably thought I was like Warren Buffett, and I was a master investor, and I made a lot of mistakes where I should have just stuck to design build because I became really good at it.
And speaking of journey, I would just say mastery of anything is a journey. It's not a destination. And if you're trying to start a business, it's going to start at a certain stage, but it's going to continue to evolve and just kind of embrace that journey.
Yeah. I would say one of the quotes from one of my favorite books, Redeeming Your Time, is have the ability to discern the essential from the noise. I think a lot of times when I was starting my business, I was putting way too much attention on things that were non-essential. And as we grew, that became very clear. So just understanding the difference, really focusing on what is essential, what is just noise, has really helped me. And I cannot emphasize enough what Chris said was, knowing your numbers. For the first couple of years, I took a lot of pride in the fact that I wasn't a businessman and I was a carpenter first. And I had my accountant, just telling me all these things. I'm like, that's great. Cool. We made money this year. Great. I didn't put any emphasis on actually studying what I needed to know. So from knowing your numbers early on to taking those next steps and what do I not know about this next step? What do I not know about leading an 8, 10, $20 million company? Putting a lot of effort into educating myself. Again, self-compassion here because you do feel like an imposter sometimes when you're trying to learn these things on, you know, webinars or YouTube videos late at night. But ultimately, just allowing yourself to grow. Like, and I specifically mean that allow yourself to grow. I think a lot of times we cap it, right? It was like, oh, I can't do anything more than this. Ferris, you probably you mentioned that too. It's like, no, that self-limiting thing, get rid of it. Like you are going to do great. Now, of course, if I had a crystal ball, I would love to be able to go back and tell myself, like, hey, you're going to make it, you know, but we certainly don't have that. Um, well, we're 7 minutes past. I want to honor everybody's time. There's a bunch of questions in the QA that I'm going to probably copy and paste. And guys, if you're open to it, I'll email some of these questions to you that were a little bit more
Sure.
specific on sales process and hiring strategies and things. Of course, there are topics that we didn't even get to today that I was really excited about as far as actual hiring practices and roles of technology that have helped you kind of grow to the next level. So perhaps in a follow-up, I'll collect some information from you guys, all you guys on this webinar. I'll send an email out to you guys with some of these Q&As answered, and of course, maybe some follow-ups on topics we didn't get to touch. But until next time, I hope that everybody got a lot out of this particular webinar. And send me an email if you want to hear more about this particular topic from these guys specifically. Perhaps we can line up another webinar because, again, this conversation could have gone on for a couple more hours. But to honor your time, Chris, Mark, Ferris, thank you guys so much for spilling the tea, letting us know how you guys did it. I admire you guys. So thank you again so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, AJ. It was good
Thanks,
to
AJ.
talk to you guys.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thanks, AJ.
I appreciate you guys. Say thank you guys so much. I will see you next time.
All right, take
All
care.
right, thanks, guys.
Bye.